Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you are in the world. Like always, I'm Leachko.
I'm Ellie Spearman, and we are back again with another episode of the Retail Lounge, here with episode 2 of 2025.
Woohoo! And today we have a special guest. We have Nick Jones. He's the managing partner at OWND Ideas Factory. So Nick, welcome aboard.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And like always, we'd love to hear a little bit about you and OWND in general, your agency. And it'd be great for you to explain a little bit.
Yeah, of course. So Nick Jones, I've had a 25 plus year career in the marketing world. I started out in general advertising in New York many years ago. I've worked in London and worked most of my career in Chicago. And I, as I say, started out in general advertising and then sort of migrated towards some of the more performance-based parts of the industry, like shopper, commerce, retail. Worked at some of the biggest agencies in the world, FCB, Geometry, now VML, Leo Burnett, ARC, and just recently joined some good friends and colleagues to start a new agency called OWND Ideas Factory. The company's been around about 4 years, but we really kind of kicked off in full form about 9 months ago. And we've been fortunate enough to pick up a couple of terrific clients. We have Club Champion, it's a golf customization partner, and then also Kona Brewing Hawaii, which is the lovely beer, things like Longboard and Big Wave. And we are an agency that really, for our size, we're probably the smallest agency that can deliver full funnel work. We believe strongly that it all starts with the idea.
Yeah.
It's Ideas Factory. Don't try to focus on one specific channel and trying to be like a specialist, because we don't believe marketing works like that. And so we're really honing our craft around big ideas that can be delivered in any channel, anywhere in the marketplace. And that's we think that's the future of the business. So we're excited to be starting.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
It's fantastic.
And this was an interesting podcast that we thought it'd be great to talk to you with, because we've been talking to people in the execution realm or when they add value along the project itself. But we never talk to people who start the big idea, started from ground zero, and kind of work their way through it and see something from idea to fruition. So, when it comes to finding that big spark, the big idea, how do you guys go about that with a client? How do you help generate that and come up with the brand campaign ideas, things like that? That's because, people like Pepsi and things like that, they have to have those meetings in the war room about like what happens, what's 2025 looking like? What's the next 2 or 3 years looking like? A lot of that stuff obviously is done and in the hopper, and then the execution phases, start afterwards. So it'd be great to hear from your perspective. You start at ground zero with clients.
Yeah, so we try to think about it in terms of we want to find that intersection between what the brand stands for, what it is, and a sort of human or cultural truth. I think the best examples of marketing and advertising have found that kind of sweet spot, that bit of magic, where you find what's happening culturally in the wide world, and the core fundamental foundations of a brand. Where those two intersect, that's where the magic lies, and that's where we start. And then, the reason why we're called OWND Ideas Factory is we want to turn the factory on and start pumping out ideas. A lot of creatives kind of get a bit concerned about, is that very tactical? Is it just like, volume instead of quality? But actually, it's the other way around. The more ideas we put out there and can bounce off our client collaboratively, the more likely we are to land on that piece of magic. So we have a very sort of open factory floor. We don't have a black box where we go away for months and then come back with our 1 or 2 ideas. Instead, we have the client involved with us. We bounce ideas off them, and that's how we land on a big idea that, like I say, has that cultural and human truth as well as the brand at the heart of it.
It's a constructive, interactive space, if you will, especially in terms of generating new concepts. That's great, especially from a client relations standpoint. To trickle off that as in addition to just creating the ideas with the client, then where is that next step in terms of making that bold concept an actionable item? Selling in, buying into the concept, and then executing it after the fact. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Sure. A couple of thoughts there. I think the first is we sort of will sometimes say, if it doesn't work on a shelf talker, how good is the idea? The smallest, most tactical thing has to be able to bring the idea to life. And it's a great test to say, it's all very well to be able to do a 30-second commercial about an idea. What do you say when you're in that tiny space and that moment in time? So we do that. That's a sort of like just a rule of thumb or a test. But we also think about the full funnel and moments along that customer journey, that consumer journey. What are those moments? What are they thinking? What are they doing? Are they ready to convert? So how does that big idea start to change and manifest itself at those different touch points? The other thing we do is we have a thought that we've coined the term creatia. It's the magic kind of connection between creative and media. And the reason we really are excited about this concept is if you think about, the medium is the message and vice versa. I don't think enough marketing is developed with those two, with creative and media connected. We love to get early views of the media plan, the retail strategy, what's happening online, what's happening in the sort of commerce space, because the idea can then be kind of melded and changed to really fit the media that we're using, and vice versa. We can maybe give it sort of direction to the media team. Hey, maybe we should look at this because of the idea. Sometimes the idea itself can yield media executions you've never thought of. Maybe it needs to be an experience. Maybe it's something at a store. So we like that idea of creatia, where creative meets media.
Interesting. So I guess when it comes into that, how do you get the buy-in? So when are you pushing back on the client and say, listen, this is going to work. We see this, you're showing industry trends. What is that? When does it happen where you get all full support from everybody and then move it on from there? Because I know you basically have like a full-blown idea session with them and coming up with that. Are you strategically making that more of like a win-win situation, or you're the ones kind of telling them, the direction?
So that's a really great question, because honestly, having worked in this industry for 25 plus years, this is the hardest thing we do, especially as account people. It's sort of, we sometimes say it's a miracle when a really great idea makes it to the final, real world. Yeah. And it's not to criticize clients. They have, business objectives and all sorts of pressures on them that sometimes make risk difficult. But the way we tackle it is, you feel like you have to be a used car salesman at the same time as a sort of shrink at the same time. There's so many other capabilities to get the idea home. But the way we get around that is a couple of things. First of all, by being highly collaborative, we find that our clients have much more ownership of the idea because they were there when it was born. Yeah. They had a part to play, so they don't look at it as, hey, this is the agency's idea, do we like it or not? It's, hey, we were part of the creation of this idea, so that's important. The other part is we have a process at Owned Ideas Factory called the brand fight, where we really establish the brand's foundations. We call it like a brand house, where we understand the positioning, we understand what the history of the brand is. We understand the sort of creative platform that comes out of that brand position. And by having those foundations really set, in many ways, the creative, when it's matched with cultural truth, becomes inevitable. It's sort of like, yes, of course, this is the answer, because this is who we are as a brand. And I think, too many brands, you have to know both who you are as a brand and who you're not. And I think too many brands sometimes are afraid to say what they're not and push certain things aside. We really encourage our clients to think about the brand fundamentals, the history and the sort of story of the brand. And then that also makes sure that buy-in is easier because it's coming from the heart of the brand itself.
So essentially it's like the ethos you're kind of putting together, how you talk, how you walk, how you run, and everything in the beginning.
Right.
Totally. I mean, we even, as part of the brand fight, we really get into things like brand archetypes. You know, are you a caretaker? Are you a rebel? Are you a hero?
Yeah.
Because those, you know, you've heard it before, but you know, stories since, you know, time began have always had one of those archetypes, you know, whether sometimes many, you know, whether it is the hero or the caretaker. And so, you know, human beings listen and take in storytelling when those archetypes are involved.
Yeah.
So we find, okay, what is the brand really, you know, about as an archetype in a story? So, for instance, Mike Freeze, who's our founder at Owned Ideas Factory, he worked for a number of years on the Whirlpool brand, and Whirlpool was a caregiver brand. And as a caregiver brand, it was much easier then to really focus on what does that mean to be a caregiver, to take care of family, to want them to be happy and together and all those things. And then that yielded amazing award-winning work that lived up to what they were as an archetype.
Yeah, that's really valuable. And that aspect too, how you mentioned ethos, especially in retrospect to the brand Whirlpool being caregiver, it is almost in some ways like having that conversation is the pre-existing notion before you've kicked off this idea and allowed it to start to come to life. You know, that seed conversation, it is a reality check to remind the brand how to have that emotional connection through that storytelling narrative for sure. And I wanted, yeah, definitely. And I wanted to trickle off that again, to push into, you know, what does that conversation look like after you've decided, okay, this makes sense. This is where the brand's going. We've decided on this idea. How is it coming to life? What is the higher level concept where you're fully executing now that new brand idea that you have incited or offered up to the table?
Because I guess this is where you start to make big impact on the big idea you guys started.
Right.
Yeah. So in terms of channels and execution and that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah. So we, like I say, we definitely look at the full funnel. That's the core of the agency, is being able to think of all of the touch points along the consumer journey. And we then start to adapt the big idea and say, what's different about this moment? Let's say at the top of the funnel, when we're really trying to get our brand or a particular product within a brand into the evoke set of brands that the consumer might select from. If we can get in there and stay in their mind, it means when they're ready to buy, we're in a good place. But then, of course, when we get into the store or we get onto the online stores, then the gears have to shift towards conversion. And so you start to change the messaging, look for ways to close. And I think what has happened, in the industry as a whole, is people have become somewhat obsessed with sort of performance-based marketing, almost to the point we actually did an article about comparing performance marketing to crack cocaine, that there's a sort of an addiction, and that addiction can actually start to destroy the brand, just like any addiction. It can start to make the brand suffer. So you just have to know where you are in the funnel. You can't expect TV ads and print ads to convert 100%. They're not going to close the deal just by virtue of where you are and the mindset you're in. But of course, you can expect that of the shopper, retail, online. But I think when brands focus entirely on performance-based marketing, it's really a race to the bottom. They get sort of addicted on the one and done, give an offer, give a discount, cut the price, try to get the needle moving on those metrics at the bottom. and often at the detriment of the long-term value of the brand. So this is why we, as Owned Ideas Factory, we've really focused on, all points along that potential consumer journey.
Right. I feel like that's a great example too of a brand marketing story becoming congested rather than intentional. It definitely takes away from that for sure.
Would you think that maybe when it comes to just executing and finding the numbers and finding the data, that's like the running, like you didn't start crawling first, you didn't start to walk, like you went directly into running. And so is that safe to say that maybe you start off with clients like, hey, baby steps first, let's figure out how to crawl and kind of understand who you are. Then the next phase is to walk, and then maybe we'll start testing and trying to convert data to see what's working, what's not working. And then the running is then kind of monitoring.
Slight adjustment I would make to that thought, it's a good one, but it kind of can sometimes be at odds with the client's immediate needs. And so we're not so, pure and kind of, it has to be like this, that we don't recognize immediate needs. So sometimes our clients will say, yeah, we understand over the next, 90 days, 180 days, you need to move the needle because you've got quarterly earnings reports, or you need to fund a budget for another project. So we'll help and make sure that the conversion tactics also really live up to the brand and don't become a race to the bottom, while at the same time we're parallel pathing. Let's think about the whole funnel. Let's think about the entire consumer journey. So only say, yes, in an ideal world, you would kind of walk, crawl, run, and maybe you would start at the top of the funnel and move on down. But it's, as you know, it's you typically are stepping into a plane that's already in the air and has to stay there. And so we have to keep the business running and the sales coming in. But we help clients to think about all of those touch points and how to build the brand over time as well.
So with that, do you celebrate the strengths of them and kind of double down on that sort of opportunity? So if you go into a brand they're doing maybe 2 out of the 4 things that are working for them, do you help them find new options maybe? Or maybe you double down on those 2 ideas, like less is more sort of thing, keep it simple, keep the audience engaged on your very direct, straight, simple message? Or, when are the opportunities that you start doing new things and you test maybe new concepts that might help them out?
Yeah, that's really interesting because, we've seen in the last couple of years when brands maybe get too hung up on changing, like Starbucks has run into this, where they just threw so many ideas at the problem and at the brand that consumers just didn't know what Starbucks was anymore. By integrating all sorts of digital point of sale and changing the way that they did business, it became confusing. And now we're seeing a new CEO coming in and saying, you know what, we need to get back to basics. We're about the interaction between us and the customer. We're about handwritten notes on the cup, not just printouts. We want to inject humanity into it because it's a social occasion, things like that. So the way I think about, and at Owned Ideas Factory, the way we think about what do you keep doing, what do you change, what do you double down on is actually, I think Coca-Cola invented this rule of thumb, but it's called the 70-20-10 rule. And what it is, it says 70% of your marketing needs to be tried, tested, it works, it keeps the business running, keeps the lights on and doesn't disrupt the channel, etc. And just the basics. 20% is what I call new. So it's maybe being tried in another channel and we know it works, or there's been a test already and we're confident that it's not going to be a problem. Let's start doing that and see if we see some traction. And then 10% is next. It's completely new to the industry. It might be technology based, it's innovation, it's something that you want to see what happens. And when you do it that way, you're only risking 10% of your marketing budget, but you can find out, and then maybe the next becomes the new, and the new becomes the now, and that's how that 70-20-10 now, new, next approach works.
That's kind of how evolution happens with the business. You got to start something new and carry on.
Yeah, definitely. I was actually curious if you could share a bit more also how the Ideas Factory level sets the conversation between, of course, connecting with your client, helping them understand the brand and like populate these new ideas, but also from a logistical standpoint in terms of statistics, in terms of what will work and what's not going to work. So I guess let's move back into that funnel concept where we're talking about the multi-channel magic, right? Where's that level of quantity over quality, or, measuring success at a numerical number in terms of what's working and what's not in the space?
Yeah, so there's so many ways, as you know, that we can measure marketing success. Some of it, of course, is dependent upon channel partners. You have to get the retailers, for instance, to share data. Some of the online retailers are better and more sort of comfortable with that because it's their natural business. So, an Amazon is going to be a little bit more data centric. So that certainly helps. And then, of course, clients have to be willing, and usually they are, to share sales data and give you a sense. So we definitely want to see that data built into the strategy and use the constantly evolving feedback to create the next strategy. Mm-hmm. And then the nice thing is that although, of course, there are definitely media like TV, print, and certainly like physical merchandising and retail that are kind of locked and loaded for a period of time. You probably, there's not a lot you can do in 90 days when something's up in store. Mm-hmm. But thankfully, we also have so many digital touch points where we can be testing, learning, quickly changing. There's no reason why a particular message that isn't working as well online can't be taken down and then double up on things that are working better. So I think that's a good way to think about it, is, that the more digital environments give you that ability to quickly test and learn. And then even that learning can be fed back into the longer term strategy, so that the next time you're briefing for new concept ideas, you've got that built in as well.
Hmm. So that's interesting when it comes like omnichannel. So like if you get somebody on the digital side, does that messaging somewhat change when you get into the physical setting? So the overall branding stays the same, but how often do you change all of that so it's still similar, and it's what's the word I want to use? Familiar to them, but it changed a little bit because you took them from that banner ad and you got them inside the store. Do you guys consider that all the way through?
Yeah, for sure. We sometimes we get a bit too obsessed with, some people call it matching luggage, that, everything needs to look and sound exactly the same. Yep. I think that's probably asking a lot of consumers. They're not thinking about brands as often as we are. And plus they're thinking about thousands rather than the few that we get to play with. So then they're not as likely to be like, well, I didn't see this in the online environment. Why? It can't be the same thing. That's less likely. But that being said, we want the brand foundations, those things we established at the beginning of the process. We want those to guide what we're saying everywhere. So if you've established a brand truth and positioning, and you've established what archetype you are, you really know what the sort of brand house is and what its foundations are, then you just use that to say, well, this is how we speak to people at a store shelf. This is how we speak to people about our brand online. This is how we speak to them on video or film. So it's more about going back to those fundamentals than necessarily saying, how are we changing the message each time? It's like, imagine starting with, again, back to that, that shelf talker example. You could almost start by saying, well, hey, this is who we are as a brand. This is our campaign. What would I say at this point with this amount of space? And that kind of yields the answer. That moment in the funnel is different than the moment, further up the funnel, but you've got the fundamentals of the brand, to hand.
Yeah. Right. I have kind of a theoretical question in some nuances just to ask you. As we're discussing this, I thought about it and just wanted to know if you had any experience or insight to share regarding this. So in your brand relations over time, have you ever come across an interaction where it wasn't just an instance where, oh, you are producing a new concept or idea for a specific brand or creating a new idea that's on trend with what's, up and coming, up and running, booming, if you will, but more so entirely reinventing the wheel, where maybe you did have to have an interaction or a longer conversation about, all right, there are missing factors or missing pieces to this puzzle in terms of the larger brand picture. Have you had that interaction? And then, how did you problem solve that? How did you move forward? What did that look like in terms from a process level?
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts come to mind on that. The first is that usually is going to come out in our brand fight. So when we do, because the brand fight we do, it's probably like 6 to 8 weeks of stakeholder interviews, of desk research around the category, the competition, the consumer, societal trends, every aspect of the brand we look at, and then we actually feed it back to the client in a 2 to 3 day hot session where we literally tell them everything we've learned about the history of the brand, about the dynamics, why people like it, those who don't. All of it gets sort of synthesized. And by doing that, there usually aren't any kind of, sort of pitfalls or, problems that we didn't anticipate. So that, everyone's on the same page. Everybody agrees at the end of those 2 or 3 days, this is fundamentally what this brand is all about, every aspect. And that can last then for decades, by the way. Wow. We've done it, with some of the Whirlpool brands. It just then becomes evergreen and really doesn't need to change, even as you change campaigns and taglines and everything else.
Yeah.
So that's kind of one part of it. The other is there are definitely times, and this is kind of slightly heresy, there are definitely times where we'll be working on a category for whatever reason, maybe it's a pitch, and we'll stumble across an incredible idea. This actually happened recently in the pet food category. So if there's any pet foods out there who want to hear more, where we were pitching a pet food category, the pitch went away. But as we got into it and we looked at the category and the competitive environment and the consumers or the owners of the consumers, etc., we just came across this incredible idea that nobody's thought about, that nobody's kind of done before. And that's one of those moments where you're like, actually, this we could go and shop around to other pet brands and manufacturers. The heresy part is, it didn't come from a specific brand with a specific strategy and foundations, but we find there's something so big, so culturally relevant, that it could lend itself to the category as a whole. So I think that answers that part of the question.
Definitely.
Some of it comes out of digging and some of it just comes out of magic at a certain moment.
Yeah, no, that was a beautiful response. I was semi coming from a place of almost skepticism in terms of what that, brand conversation looks like. And you again related it back to magic. That's fantastic. Yeah, well said.
So to maybe tie this conversation up with a bow, I have a question like, what is your favorite maybe execution of messaging that you've seen in a brand out there that, has held its weight over time? Hasn't gotten old, and to your point, it's been evergreen, but the foundation has stayed the same. What was something that's been your favorite, that's always stuck out, that maybe you look at consistently to find inspiration, or like the do's and don'ts that they just did well?
Oh gosh, there's so many out there. There are many, many bad ones too, but there are many, many good ones that have lasted the test of time. I think I'm going to go close to home. It's not a client, actually. It's not a client of ours. But it's one that I think is near and dear to several of our team members because they all worked on it. And that's Maytag, part of the Whirlpool company. And the reason why Maytag comes to mind is that you've all heard of the Maytag man.
Yep.
And, 15, 20 years ago, when I think he first started, he was about the poor lonely guy who waits for the phone to ring because somebody's got a problem with a Maytag dishwasher or washing machine, and the phone never rang because they were so reliable. Well, it kind of, it's such a great brand and a great sort of brand icon, but it started to get a bit sleepy, a bit tired, and some of the members of our team worked on bringing that Maytag man into the 21st century and kind of really making him a modern version. And they were able to do it. He became a bit more fundamental to the messaging and a bit more of a like part of the sort of experience of the brand.
Yep.
But the reason why it's kind of, what I love about that is it's a timeless kind of strategy and a timeless brand reason for being, but the marketing part has evolved and has adapted and has, modernized. So I think that's probably one that I look at and go, yeah, that's full funnel. It's smart. It knows what it is. It knows what it's not, and it's changed over time, but stayed true to the brand.
I love when they changed it so he like becomes the products in the house.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a great idea, because I do remember those from 20 years ago, those commercials, and then how they evolved him all the way through and still made him relevant. And when you look at a guy sitting where a stove should have been with a blue suit on, that's Maytag. Like that's
Maytag man.
Yeah, that's pretty genius.
Because it used to be, because it used to be the guy waiting for the phone call that never came. And I think now people are a bit less, like their expectations are that it's going to work anyway. We don't even question that. But having the Maytag man be part of the product and be thinking about what it takes to deliver the perfect result is taking that to the next level.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that's fantastic. All right, Nick. Well, we very much appreciate your time, and thank you so much for joining us on the Retail Lounge. And again, just a note for all of our viewers, thanks for watching. If you have any feedback for us, any topic suggestions for us to cover in the future, or you want to be a part of this conversation, let us know in the comments down below. Make sure to hit the bell and subscribe for all of our new episodes coming up through the rest of the year. We will see you next time on the Retail Lounge.